Inside Rikers Island, the dark truth about America's most dangerous jail. The night the island turned red, the lights flickered, then the screams started. Inmates were pounding on their doors, steel echoing through the hall like gunfire. Somewhere down the tier, a man was shouting for help, his voice cracking, desperate. Guards rushed down the corridor in riot gear, shields raised, batons drawn. Smoke filled the air from burning trash bins and shattered fluorescent lights sparked above. And right in the middle of the chaos, one inmate stood over another, blood dripping from his hands, whispering, "This is Rikers. This is what they don't tell you." That night, 23 people were injured. 3 nearly died. But the most terrifying part? No one was surprised. Because inside Rikers Island, this wasn't chaos. It was routine. Now the question is, how did America's most secured jail become a place so violent, so corrupt, that even the guards fear stepping inside? Let's rewind. The monster behind the water. When you see Rikers Island from above, it almost looks peaceful. A small island sitting between Queens and the Bronx, surrounded by calm blue water. But that water doesn't protect anyone, it traps them. Rikers is home to nearly 10,000 inmates, most of them awaiting trial. Some haven't even been convicted of a crime. Yet, every single day, they live through conditions worse than any prison in America. They call it the Island of the Forgotten. New arrivals step off the bus to the smell of sweat, bleach, and fear. Guards yell orders. Doors slam shut. And from that moment on, the rules of the outside world stop applying. Inside Rikers, there's no such thing as safety, only survival. The welcome beatdown. It's called the program. And every new inmate knows about it. When a new face shows up in the block, older inmates decide if he's weak or strong. If he looks too confident, he gets tested. One of the rookies, 19-year-old Malik, found that out fast. He'd been arrested for stealing a car, his first offense. He thought Rikers was just a temporary stop before court. But his first night changed that. As soon as lights went out, he heard the whispers. Footsteps. Then hands grabbed him from behind, pillowcases over his head. 5 minutes later, he was lying on the concrete, bleeding from his nose. His food tray was gone, and so was his pride. That's the welcome. A message, you're nobody here. The Hunger Games. Days turned into weeks. Malik stopped fighting back, because fighting meant punishment. And at Rikers, punishment could mean anything. Some days, the guards turned a blind eye while inmates fought in the showers. Other times, they joined in. Meals were cold and barely edible, sometimes a stale sandwich, sometimes something that didn't even look like food. Inmates traded packets of ramen like gold. And if you wanted extra food, you'd better earn it or steal it. Malik learned to survive by aligning himself with a group. But loyalty had a price. When his cellmate got caught hiding a shank, Malik was punished too, stripped, beaten, and thrown into the Bing. The Bing. They call solitary confinement the Bing. A small cell. No light. No sound. 23 hours a day in silence, 1 hour for recreation, which was just another empty cage. Malik scratched tallies into the wall to keep track of days. He lost count after 15. The only sound he heard was the buzz of the fluorescent bulb and the occasional scream from another cell. Some men broke down and talked to themselves. Others stopped talking altogether. When Malik finally got out, his hands shook constantly. He said it felt like stepping into another world, but the world didn't feel real anymore. And that's when he realized something most inmates eventually learn. You don't leave Rikers the same way you came in. The officer's game. But inmates aren't the only ones trapped here. Even some guards admit, Rikers changes you. There are stories of officers smuggling contraband, taking bribes, and running betting rings on inmate fights. One former correctional officer, Officer L, told reporters off record, "You either become part of the system, or the system eats you alive." There's no loyalty, only power. And power at Rikers means control over chaos. Guards are outnumbered 20 to 1. So instead of enforcing peace, some learn to pick favorites, letting gang leaders keep the dorms in line in exchange for order. But when order collapses, It's not just inmates who bleed. The riot of 2015. It started with a missing radio. A small thing, hardly worth notice. But inside Rikers, small things explode fast. An inmate accused another of stealing. Shouts turned to punches, and soon, two rival crews clashed in the day room. By the time officers responded, 40 men were fighting, chairs flying, tables overturned. When smoke cleared, 4 were unconscious, 1 was stabbed, and the guard who tried to break it up was hospitalized. No one faced consequences. The incident was filed as a disturbance. For Rikers Island, that word covers everything, from brawls to near-death assaults. And so, Malik's story wasn't even close to the worst. Because deep inside Rikers lies a part of the jail most people never see, where the problem inmates go. A place the staff calls the tombs. Where rules don't exist. And mercy doesn't either. The tombs, where hope dies last. Malik was barely conscious when they dragged him out of the dorm after the riot. His wrists were cuffed behind his back, his face swollen, one eye almost shut. He could still hear the echo of boots, the smell of pepper spray hanging heavy in the air. They didn't take him to the infirmary. They took him downstairs. The hallway got colder, darker, and quieter. The fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects. A correctional officer pushed him forward and said, "Welcome to the tombs." The tombs was a nickname passed around in whispers, a place for the troublemakers, the snitches, the ones who didn't follow the program. It wasn't officially part of Rikers Island, but everyone knew it existed. No cameras. No rules. No light. Malik's cell was a 6x8 box. The walls were gray and damp, the toilet didn't flush properly, and the air smelled like mildew and rust. There was no mattress, just a thin foam pad torn in half. The door slammed shut behind him with a metallic clang that made his chest tighten. He shouted for water, but no one came. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time didn't move the same in the tombs. He'd hear voices through the vents, some crying, some laughing like they'd lost their minds. Others whispered things he couldn't understand. Once, he thought someone was calling his name, but when he shouted back, the voice went silent. That silence was worse than the noise. One night, Malik was woken by the sound of metal scraping against the floor. He pressed his ear to the wall. The voice next door whispered, "You new here?" The man's name was Darnell. He'd been in the tombs for nearly 6 months for assaulting staff. Darnell told Malik the truth, how the tombs were used to break men down, not to discipline them. "They keep us here, till we lose track of who we are," Darnell said. "Some never come back out." He wasn't lying. Malik would hear guards dragging bodies out in the middle of the night. Men who had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing. Every sound echoed through the pipes like a ghost. Malik tried to stay strong, but the walls were closing in on him. He began talking to himself, whispering stories from his childhood just to hear a human voice. He'd count his breaths to stay sane. One morning, after what felt like forever, a guard opened his cell and threw in a brown tray. "Breakfast," the guard said, smirking. The food was cold, gray, and smelled like something that had died days ago. Malik pushed it away. The guard laughed and said, "Suit yourself. You'll be hungry by tomorrow." He was right. Weeks passed. Malik's beard grew out, his eyes hollowed. He started seeing things in the dark. A face in the corner, a figure standing by the toilet. He'd close his eyes, but the figure stayed. One night he heard Darnell shouting from the next cell, banging on the door. Then, silence. The next morning, when Malik called out, there was no answer. Only a faint dripping sound through the vent. Hours later, the guards came and dragged out a black bag. They didn't even look at Malik. He pressed his forehead against the cold steel and whispered, "They killed him." Days later, Malik was pulled from his cell without warning. They told him he was being moved. He didn't ask where. He didn't care. Anything was better than the tombs. But when they brought him back up to the general population, he realized something had changed. The air felt thicker. The noise louder. The men more desperate. And Malik wasn't the same either. He didn't flinch when he saw fights. He didn't speak much. He didn't eat the meals anymore, just stared at the wall like it was talking to him. He had become what Rikers wanted him to be, Num. Outside the block, administrators told reporters that Rikers was under control. They said reforms were being made. But inside, the same violence, the same neglect, the same silence continued every single day. Malik's cellmate once told him, "They don't fix this place because they don't want to. We're not people to them, we're numbers." And he was right. But everything was about to change again. Because a new inmate was arriving that week. Someone who would expose just how deep the corruption inside Rikers really ran. Someone who wouldn't stay silent. And when he stepped into the block, everything exploded again. The whistleblower, the inmate who tried to expose Rikers. The new inmate arrived on a gray morning when the fog rolled across the East River like smoke. The bus hissed to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal a man in cuffs, thin, older, and calm in a way that didn't fit the chaos around him. His name was Raymond Cruz. He wasn't like the others. Raymond wasn't a gang member, not a repeat offender. He was a former city employee, a corrections clerk who'd been arrested for leaking documents about inmate abuse inside Rikers. He'd exposed that officers were falsifying reports to cover up beatings, injuries, even deaths. Now, he was here, in the same place he tried to expose. When the other inmates found out who he was, they didn't know whether to fear him or protect him. Some respected his courage. Others saw him as a target. And the guards? They hated him. From day one, he was marked. Malik first met Raymond in the mess hall. Raymond sat alone, eyes down, hands shaking slightly as he ate. Malik slid onto the bench across from him. "You're the guy who blew the whistle, right?" Malik asked quietly. Raymond hesitated, then nodded. "Doesn't matter now," he said. "They made sure I ended up right where I didn't want to be." He explained how his arrest came after anonymous threats, how his case, mysteriously, moved faster than any other. And once inside Rikers, he started seeing the same faces he'd written about in his reports, guards who smiled when they saw him. That night, the harassment began. A guard accidentally kicked Raymond's food tray into the corner. Another called him a snitch, loud enough for the whole dorm to hear. In Rikers, that word is a death sentence. Raymond stayed quiet. He wrote notes on scraps of paper, names, times, details. He said if he ever got out, he'd send them to a journalist. Malik told him to stop, that it was too dangerous. But Raymond just smiled faintly and said, "If I stop, they win." A few nights later, Malik woke to the sound of chaos. Metal clanging, shouting, a thud against concrete. He ran to the bars and saw guards rushing past with flashlights. In the corner of the tier, Raymond was on the ground, motionless. Malik screamed for help, but no one listened. One of the guards turned and said coldly, "He fell." Everyone knew he didn't. They carried his body out under a white sheet. No sirens. No ambulance. Just silence. By morning, his name was erased from the roster. As if he never existed. Days later, rumors spread that Raymond had been transferred. But Malik had seen enough to know what transferred meant inside Rikers. He searched Raymond's bunk and found a small piece of paper tucked into a crack near the frame. On it were 2 words written in shaky handwriting. "They're watching." Malik kept that note hidden for weeks, terrified someone would find it. He noticed the cameras in the hallway never moved anymore. They were either broken or turned off. Guards stopped talking to him. Meals got smaller. He realized Raymond's death wasn't just a warning, it was a message to anyone thinking about speaking out. Still, something inside him refused to die. The old Malik, the scared kid who just wanted to survive, was gone. What remained was anger. He started telling other inmates what happened to Raymond, whispering it cell to cell. He was trying to tell the truth, Malik said, and they killed him for it. Slowly word spread. Inmates began refusing work duties, banging on doors during count, shouting Raymond's name through the vents. The noise grew louder every night. Until one evening, the whole block erupted. It started with a single shout, "Justice for Ray." Then came another. And another. By the time the guards realized what was happening, the entire tier was pounding on their cell doors in rhythm, chanting his name. The lights flickered. Alarms screamed. Riot teams flooded the hallway. Pepper spray filled the air again. But this time, it wasn't just chaos. It was defiance. Malik stood by the bars, coughing through the haze, and shouted the words Raymond once told him. "If I stop, they win." He didn't know it yet, but that riot would trigger an investigation, one that would expose Rikers like never before. But before any investigator could arrive, the system moved faster than justice. The riot was crushed. Inmates were beaten. Cells flooded. And Malik was once again dragged away in cuffs. Only this time, he wasn't going to the tombs. He was headed somewhere worse. Somewhere that made the tombs look merciful. A place they called the box. The box, where the system breaks you. They said the box was just another form of segregation. But the men who'd been there called it what it really was, a burial before death. When Malik's cuffs were removed, he stepped into a corridor colder than ice. The air smelled of bleach and despair. The walls were freshly painted white, but underneath the surface, you could still see old stains, brown, red, and gray, marks from the lives erased here. The officer escorting him didn't say much. Just one sentence that echoed in Malik's head for weeks. "In here, you either go quiet, or you go crazy." Malik didn't reply. He didn't have to. He already knew which one they wanted. His new cell was smaller than a bathroom stall. The only window was a slit near the ceiling that let in a thread of dull light for about 10 minutes a day. No mattress. No books. Just a steel bed frame, a toilet, and a flickering light bulb that hummed nonstop. 24 hours. No yard time. No calls. No mail. No sound except for his own breathing. The rules of Rikers were cruel. But the box? The box rewrote a man's soul. Malik tried to hold on to his mind by talking to himself. He'd tell imaginary stories, count his heartbeats, remember faces from the outside world. But after the first week, he began to forget what his mother's voice sounded like. After the second, he forgot what day it was. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and see Raymond's body on the floor again. Other times, he'd hear whispering from the air vent. It wasn't real, but it didn't feel fake either. He'd pound on the walls just to feel something. Anything. "Hey," he shouted once. "Anyone there?" No answer. Just the hum of the bulb. He sank to the floor, knees to his chest, whispering. "They can break your body, but they don't get your mind." But every hour in that cell felt like a war. One night, Malik woke up shivering. The lights had gone out completely. Pitch black. Then he heard it, a faint scratching sound behind the wall. He pressed his ear to it. Another inmate, maybe 2 cells down, was tapping. Slow. Repetitive. Almost like Morse code. Malik tapped back. The other man stopped for a second, then continued, louder this time. 4 days, they communicated through that rhythm. No words, just taps. It was the only proof Malik had that he wasn't alone. But one morning, the tapping stopped. When guards came through later, they were carrying a stretcher. The man had taken his life with a torn bedsheet. Malik stared at the door for hours after they took him away, frozen. He realized, this place didn't just punish. It erased. And for the first time, he felt something worse than fear. He felt nothing. Then one day, the door opened. A guard stepped in, holding a file. "Pack your stuff," he said. Malik blinked. "But where am I going?" "Doesn't matter," the guard muttered. "You've been cleared for transfer." Transfer? That word again. He wanted to ask to where, but deep down he already knew nothing good ever came after that word in Rikers. As they led him down the hallway, he caught a glimpse of himself in a cracked window. His face was pale, eyes hollow, lips dry. He barely recognized the man looking back. For a second, he wondered if this was all part of the plan, to strip a man of everything until even his reflection gave up on him. They put Malik on a bus heading off the island. The engine rumbled, and the guards sat with blank faces, staring out the windows. For the first time in months, he could see the skyline of New York again, buildings glowing across the water, the city that forgot about him. But something inside him had changed. He wasn't just another inmate anymore. He was a witness, a survivor. And though Rikers had taken everything, his strength, his sleep, his peace, it hadn't taken his memory. He knew the stories, the faces, the pain, the cover-ups. Everything Raymond had died trying to tell the world. Malik had seen with his own eyes. He whispered to himself, "If I ever get out, I'll tell it all." The bus rolled over the bridge, and the island behind him disappeared into the fog. But Rikers doesn't let go that easily. Because even as Malik left the island, the screams, the sirens, and the ghosts of the tombs followed him, echoing in his head like a curse that would never fade. And what he didn't know yet was this. The story of Rikers Island wasn't over. The truth was still buried deep inside those walls, waiting for someone brave, or broken, enough to dig it out. The leak, when the truth finally escaped Rikers. The morning Malik left Rikers Island, the sky was gray, neither dark nor light, just empty. He sat in the back of the transfer van, wrists chained, staring through the narrow cage window as the island shrank behind him. He didn't realize it yet, but that would be the last time he'd ever see it. The air outside smelled different. Cleaner. Quieter. But the noise of Rikers was still in his head, the endless shouting, the keys jingling, the metal slamming. It wasn't something you could escape from. Not really. They dropped him off at a city courthouse for a hearing he'd forgotten existed. His case had dragged on so long, it had become background noise. This time, though, something unexpected happened. The judge looked over his file, sighed, and said, "Given the time served and overcrowding at Rikers, the court will grant supervised release." Just like that, Malik was free. No celebration. No joy. Just silence and confusion. The guards handed him a small plastic bag with his clothes, his shoelaces, and a folded piece of paper he didn't recognize. He unfolded it. It was Raymond's handwriting. "If I stop, they win. Don't stop." Malik's chest tightened. He didn't know how the note got there, maybe another inmate, maybe a sympathetic guard, but one thing was clear, Raymond's voice hadn't died in the tombs. It had followed him out. The city outside felt alien. The noise, the people, the freedom, all of it too bright, too loud, too fast. Malik walked aimlessly for hours, not sure where to go. No family waiting. No home left. He eventually found a shelter in Brooklyn, a place full of men who'd also come out of the system. Some from Rikers, some from worse. They all carried the same look, blank eyes, silent rage, broken sleep. But Malik wasn't like them. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He started writing. Every night, by the flickering light of the shelter hallway, he wrote everything he remembered: names, dates, smells, faces. The beatings, the deaths, the corruption, the cover-ups. Everything Raymond had told him, he put to paper. He didn't know who would listen. He just knew someone had to. One day, while getting food at a local outreach kitchen, Malik met a woman named Naomi Grant, a journalist who'd been covering prison reform for years. She recognized the way he talked, the way his eyes shifted when someone mentioned Rikers. "You been there?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Do you still hear it?" she whispered. "Every night," Malik said. Naomi didn't push. Instead, she handed him her card and said, "If you ever want to tell your story, I'll listen." He didn't call her for 3 weeks. But when he finally did, he brought every piece of paper he'd written, every detail of Raymond's death, the tombs, the box, everything. Naomi read for hours in silence. Then she said something that made Malik's stomach twist. "This is bigger than both of you." She started digging through court records, incident reports, staff rosters. Some files were missing. Others were falsified. But patterns began to emerge: unexplained injuries, inconsistent logs, doctored camera footage, and a long trail of transfer orders that led nowhere. When her story went live weeks later, it hit the city like a bomb. The headline read, "Inside Rikers Island, the dark truth they tried to hide." It included names, testimony, and photos from leaked records, proof of neglect, violence, and deaths that were never reported. Malik's name wasn't in it, but his words were. Raymond's too. The city erupted. News anchors debated. Politicians promised swift reform. Protests flooded downtown Manhattan, with chants echoing, "Close Rikers! Close it now!" But inside the jail, change came slower than words. Guards laughed off the news. Administrators blamed bad apples. And the same cycle continued, new inmates, same violence. Still, something had shifted. The silence was cracking. Malik was invited to speak at a community hearing. He stood at a podium under harsh lights, hands trembling as he faced the crowd. Cameras rolled, reporters scribbled, and for a second he wanted to run. Then he remembered Raymond's words. He took a breath and said, "They told me to forget, to keep quiet, to pretend the screams didn't exist. But if I stop, they win." The room went still. For the first time, the truth had a voice. Weeks later, Naomi published a follow-up story about the ongoing investigations. Several officers were suspended. Lawsuits were filed. But Rikers was still open. Malik knew the system was too big to crumble overnight. But now it was being watched. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something. One evening, as he walked along the East River, Malik looked out at the faint silhouette of the island in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the water blood orange. He whispered, "You didn't die for nothing, Ray." A breeze moved across the water, cold and sharp, carrying the faint smell of salt and steel. He closed his eyes. For the first time since he'd left, he didn't hear the screams. Just silence, and the feeling that maybe, someday, justice would come. Because Rikers Island wasn't just a place. It was a wound. And every story told was a step toward healing it. The aftermath, when the walls begin to crumble. The story Naomi published didn't just expose a prison, it exposed a system. For years, Rikers Island had existed in the shadows, hidden behind bureaucratic silence and concrete walls. But once the truth leaked, there was no putting it back. Every major outlet wanted a piece of the story. TV anchors repeated the same headline. Rikers Island, America's shame. Clips of Malik's trembling voice at the hearing went viral. Activists replayed his words across social media. People were finally seeing what had been ignored for decades: the bruises, the blood, the broken minds. And just like that, the invisible became impossible to deny. In the months that followed, protests grew louder. Outside City Hall, hundreds gathered holding signs. Justice behind bars. Close Rikers now. No more tombs. Families of former inmates came forward with stories of their own, sons who'd died in custody, fathers who'd disappeared after transfers, and daughters still waiting for answers that never came. The city officials couldn't ignore it anymore. They promised reform, new oversight boards, independent reviews, a new era of transparency. But Malik had seen enough to know that promises meant nothing without pressure. He started working with Naomi, visiting schools and community centers, speaking about what life inside was really like. At first, he stumbled over his words. Then his voice grew stronger. "People think Rikers is about punishment," he told one crowd. "But it's not. It's about forgetting. You go in and they forget you exist." Every talk drew bigger crowds. Some clapped. Some cried. But everyone listened. For the first time in years, Malik felt like his pain had a purpose. But not everyone wanted him to speak. One night, after a town hall event in Queens, Malik noticed a black sedan parked across the street. No license plate. No movement. Just two men inside, silhouettes barely visible. When he looked directly at them, the car pulled away slowly, no headlights. Later that week, he got an anonymous text. "You said enough. Stay quiet." He stared at the screen for a long time. His hands shook, but his resolve didn't. He forwarded the message to Naomi. Her reply came back within seconds. "Then we know we're hitting a nerve." As investigations deepened, shocking details emerged. Internal memos proving officials had known about the tombs for years. Staff bonuses tied to incident reduction, which encouraged underreporting violence. Emails showing how complaints were buried under disciplinary paperwork. The city's commissioner resigned under pressure. The mayor promised closure of the facility within the decade. But Malik wasn't celebrating. He'd seen too many cycles of promises fade like smoke. "The system doesn't collapse," he told Naomi. "It adapts." Still, something felt different this time. The whole country was watching. One morning, Malik got a letter in the mail. It had no return address, just a single sentence inside. I was one of the guards. You were right. Folded with the note was a photo, a grainy image of the tomb's hallway, time-stamped the night Raymond died. In the corner of the frame, the figure of a guard stood over him. Malik's breath caught in his throat. Proof. He brought it to Naomi. Together, they turned it over to investigators. This time, the city couldn't ignore it. An internal affairs probe was launched. Federal agents stepped in. For the first time, officers faced charges, not just for brutality, but for murder and cover-ups. When the indictments dropped, New York City trembled. News outlets called it the Rikers Reckoning. And in the center of it all stood two names: Malik Turner and Raymond Cruz. Raymond, the whistleblower who paid the price. Malik, the survivor who finished what he started. A year later, Malik stood by the East River again. In the distance, cranes moved across the skyline, dismantling old concrete walls. Rikers Island was being emptied, slowly, painfully, but finally. Naomi joined him, holding a recorder. How does it feel? She asked. Malik stared across the water, the sun glinting off the waves like sparks. He smiled faintly and said, It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like breathing again. They stood there in silence. The island still loomed, cold, lifeless. But for the first time, it was shrinking not just in the distance, but in its power. That night, Malik wrote one final page in his notebook. They said I'd never leave Rikers. But maybe the truth did. He closed the book and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered like stars, each one a reminder of every voice that refused to stay silent. And though Rikers Island might one day vanish from the map, its story would live on, in every headline, every protest, every echo of those who dared to speak. Because the dark truth of America's most dangerous jail wasn't just about what happened inside those walls. It was about what the world finally chose to see outside them.